Greetings, this is Artie from Artifact Electronics. In our last episode, we had a look at the Atari 2600 video game computer, or system, also called the 2600, and we had a look at the original and some of its work-alikes and dwelt a little bit into how they work. And today, we're going to have a little closer look at cartridges and see what we can do with those. The Gemini was one of the work-alikes. It's chip compatible with the original, but obviously in a different form factor for price reduction probably, and this one was made by Coleco. And the way this works is, you stick a cartridge into it, such as this, with an unfortunate name, which I guess at the time this cartridge appeared may not have had a negative connotation, or maybe they actually did this on purpose, but yeah, you stick it in, turn it on, and then turn the monitor on, and hopefully you'll have a game. And there it is. So if we reset it, give it a little more volume, and this is kind of like a minor 2049er clone. You get the key, and then you go open the doors. And then you die. But anyway, so what do you want to do if there are close to 500 different cartridges out there? And what do you want to do? What do you do when you want to play one that you don't have? Well, most people would go and download one of several emulators for the 2600, do a Google search and find a bunch of ROM images, and just play them on the computer. That would be the logical thing to do, but I like to keep it as original as possible, proven to me still using an antenna interface, but it's actually got a pretty clean picture with that. And then you get on your computer and you play the game, but it's not original. I mean, there's some people who think that's the way to go, but I don't. I think I like to keep it original. So we have to find a way to take those ROM images and have some sort of a cartridge that we can put Eproms into, that we can program ourselves. Now again, there are several of those available for purchase, already made. They're ROM carrier boards that are wired so that you can put an Eprom into it, and you burn one of the images that you want to play, you stick it in there, and everything's fine. But again, I got to do it the hard way. And what I did was, after the last episode, I searched through my boxes of stuff again, and I found this beauty. This was something I built a few years ago. It's nothing very complicated, except of course it didn't work when I first plugged it in because there were a bunch of fly wires. I was in the middle of doing it, and then something better came along and I abandoned it. But all it really is, it's an extension. It's got a wire that's connected to the internal. I took the internal PCB, removed the mask ROM from it, and just made an extender cable and ran it into a socket over here. And you will notice there's one chip on it, an inverter, which you can replace with a transistor and two resistors, but that's necessary, and I'll explain to you why that is there. And then we'll have a look at what goes on inside the cartridge, what you need to do to build your own, and then have a look at some games. So here we have a standard Atari cartridge. It's got a label, big label here, it's got a spine label on it, and when you take them apart, One of the problems is when you take these apart, the Atari original cartridges, they're held together by a bunch of tabs, but they do have a screw underneath the label right here, which you can feel with your finger. Actually, it's over here. And the problem is, in order to open the cartridge, you got to damage the label. But I think there are sites where you can reprint labels and stuff like that. And I'll show you in detail how I did it on the dev cartridge. But you take the screw out, and then you kind of pry the shells apart. And what will be revealed inside is this. It's basically a mask ROM. And this is what plugs into the computer. Those are the edges that plug into the computer or the video game system. And the whole principle behind it is what I did, what you saw before, is I unsoldered the mask ROM and then basically extended all of the connectors out through the ribbon cable and made a little proto board at the other end that'll let you put in a ROM. So then you may say, why didn't you just put like a socket in here and put your Eproms in there? And that's because there's one slight difference between Eproms and mask Eproms like this one, which can still be overcome. You need an extra chip or an inverter made out of a transistor and 2 resistors, but the whole point for me was to have an external board that I could experiment with, because the initial standard ROM sizes were 2K and 4K, but those grew, and the address space only allows 4K of ROM, so we got into bank switching and stuff like that, and I wanted to be able to, sometime down the road, be able to emulate that on my proto board. But to get started off, what if we just want to do a 4K? If we want to replace the 4K masked ROM with a 4K Eprom. If we look at the original layout, this is a 2732 Eprom, and checking online, where a lot of people have documented this and drawn schematics and all that stuff, it turns out that it is almost plug compatible. But almost is a key word. And the reason for that is, note that the enable pin for the Eprom is active low, indicated by the bar across it. The mask ROMs, such as this, actually had a positive logic enable signal. That means if the signal went high, the chip was enabled, but when it went low, the chip was disabled. So you cannot just put an Eprom in there, because it'll get enabled at all the wrong times, and that can be, in this case, easily overcome with an inverter. Other than that, it's fully compatible. I mean, the Eprom basically has a chip enable, and it also has this G-bar/VPP chip, but all you need to know about this is when you're not programming it, this is the output enable. So what you can do is tie the output enable low permanently, because the chip needs to be enabled for this to have any effect. And so all we needed to do was put an inverter on here. And after looking at it, the way this whole thing works is address line A12 was used as a selector because of the limited address space in there. When A12 is high, the machine's trying to read a ROM. So all we had to do was invert that. So when A12 goes high, it puts a low in here and enables the ROM, actually enables the Eprom, and now we can actually burn images into Eproms and play them. So this is a shell where I've removed the labels from. This was probably an early game that I had several copies of, and it wasn't worth very much, but we either punch a hole through the label, or in this case, I had already removed the label, take out the screw, and then this is where it gets a little bit dicey, because as you all know, removing tabs can be destructive, as is demonstrated by the Xbox 360, but the way I found that works pretty well is stick a screwdriver in here so the cover, the edge connector cover, retracts, and then after that we gently pry it apart. And this is painful because it makes loud clicks and you think it's breaking the tabs. But this one opened up cleanly. None of the tabs were broken. And all we got is the carrier board here. And it's just soldered into a ribbon cable. It just extends it. It ends up in here, which, using the highest technology as you have come to expect from Artifact Electronics, just wires it all straight to the socket. It has a zero force insertion on it, so we can easily put Eproms in there. And the above mentioned or before mentioned inverter is right here. And as you can see from the wiring, all you do with it is it's got power and ground on it, and then it takes address A12 as input, and the output is run to the chip select line. And that's really all you need to do to play a 4K and also a 2K game image. Put it all back together, and the reason I'm not showing you the footage, it's kind of fiddly to put the shutter back in place. My advice to you is, once you open this cartridge, very gently pry it apart as I showed before, but by gently I mean pry it apart so the innards don't just fly out. That way you can take a picture of how the shutter sits in here, and I mean, once you get it back in place, it actually makes a lot of sense. But as I said, it could be fiddly, and the last check, of course, is put the screwdriver in here and make sure that the shutter retracts properly. Because if the edge connector or the board inside is slightly misaligned, it won't work. I mean, you won't be able to insert it in the machine. But this one seemed to do its job. So we plug that in. And of course nothing's going to happen right now because there's no Eeprom. So I looked around, and the one thing that was kind of intriguing was a game called Pepsi Invaders. It's a 4K image. We put it into the zero force insertion socket, turn it on, and turn on the monitor. And after waiting a while, here's what we get. And this game is kind of interesting. It's high on collectors' lists because, and this is of course off the internet, but only 125 of these were made. Somebody actually hacked at Atari the original Space Invaders code and made the Coke versus Pepsi. I mean, it's called Pepsi Invaders. And they made 125 of them. Didn't put any labels on the cartridge, and handed them out to sales executives in 1983 at a big meeting, sometime before the video game crash. And it turns out that most sales executives weren't really that interested in it, and I guess a bunch of them just got tossed. There's very few of them out there, but somebody actually did read in the code for future generations to enjoy. And as you can see, the cartridge does work, and what you're doing is, I mean, I'm assuming everybody's familiar with Space Invaders, but you're shooting down the Pepsi Invaders. It's the same game, nothing much different. The only real difference is see how the I is so much narrower than the other letters, and it actually does some pretty good, did you say that? It does some really good collision detection. So it's not like drawing squares around every letter, assuming they're all the same width, but it actually distinguishes between, it uses the width of the letters for the collision detection. Uh-oh, I'm in trouble now. But that's really all you do, is you shoot Pepsi. Boom, I got the hamburger too. And on it goes. No big deal, but yeah, this is a rare cartridge that if you can find the actual cartridge, even though it's not a big deal, because the original cartridge looks just like this one with no labels on it whatsoever. So you get a plain black cartridge, but it's a collector's market. So if you can get one of those, an original one, I guess, and the only way you'd be able to tell if it's original would be if you got an original, if somebody's trying to sell you the original cartridge, you got to open it up, which is okay, there's no label to damage, and make sure that there is a mask ROM in it. Because in most cases, people are going to try to put an Eprom in it, and when you open it up, you'll see that, hey, this is not an original. But it's a great way to play the game. I don't think I'll be playing it much more often, but it's good for me to actually be able to experience the game as it was meant to be played on 2600 hardware with an analog TV where it's connected through the antenna terminals. So another game that's kind of a holy grail game called Chase the Chuck Wagon. This was only available by mail order, and you had to go out and buy a 25-pound bag of Ralston Purina, what was it, dog food, or I don't know, some sort of animal feed, and then send the proof of purchase of that in along with a check for $12.99, and you got a cartridge, this cartridge. The reason it's a holy grail is there weren't that many of them sold, and people love this game. It's not, I mean, it's not even that great of a game, but it's very, very high on collectors' lists. But building this little guy, you can actually play it the way it was meant to be played, and you're just the dog trying to get away from all of your enemies, and then go to the chuck wagon, and that completes the level. So off we go. So that bouncy thing just slows me down. It doesn't kill me or take away my health, but the guy running around on the left, if he catches me, I'm dead. So I got to stay away from him, get to the chuck wagon, and here's where the big skill comes in. I got to face that dish and press the button at the right time, and then the dog goes over and he gets points for it. So you'll see that both of these games, I mean, I've showed the Space Invaders game is actually, I mean, it's Space Invaders with you know, wrapped up in different bitmaps, and this one is, it's kind of interesting, but it's not very difficult. But this, I think both of them are to be considered true collector games. But again, it's kind of nice to be able to play these and then find out why there's so few of these left, or why they didn't make that many to begin with. So let's actually go through the Eprom burning process utilizing my state-of-the-art Eprom programming hardware. I mean, everybody has a different Eprom programmer, I mean, of the old, of the vintage type, and they all have different software. This one's running or requiring WinXP, and here's a list of games, or a list of ROM images that I downloaded, and let's Carnival or Berserk. There's also this chess program, video chess, but it is rumored that if you put it on the hardest level, it takes like 10 hours for it to make a move. So that wouldn't be too much fun to test, so I say let's do Carnival. But the way this goes is, let's see, we use the EMP20 device programmer from Needham's Electronics, which I've had very long. It uses this newfangled invention called a parallel port to communicate with the computer. And it's one of those things that this thing won't die. It just works very nicely. So the fan's getting a bit noisy, but other than that, it does the job perfectly. So let's go in and fire up the EMP software. Hit enter to connect. Okay. We have an erased 2732 that I'll insert. Then we got to go and select our device. And I'll just go to the generic 2732. I think that's a, yeah. And select that. Good. Now what we need to do is, the first thing is make sure that the device is erased. So I use option 2, verify device is erased, and boom, it's erased. Next we need to tell it what ROM image to load. And so let's see, I pressed V, enter file name, and I believe that's at C. ROM, I think that's what it was. Yeah, so now we can go to the 2600 directory. Yeah, I'm really bad with my left hand, that's why it's taking so long, but we go there and we select Berserk. It's a 4K file. So that now we specified the file name. Now we basically got to go and press 8 to load the image in. When ready, press return and read 4K, and we're ready to go. Now the only thing is it defaults to the standard algorithm, programming algorithm, basically just uses a 50 milliseconds per byte. What I usually like to do is change that a little bit so it programs faster, and it does work with most chips. It doesn't have any quick pulse algorithms for the 2732, but intelligent 1 millisecond times 3 should give us a bit of a speed increase. So after all that's done, we press 1 to program with selected algorithm, and sit back in our easy chair and relax. And it's kind of like watching a clothes dryer dry your clothes, but it's a 2732, it's small, it's not going to take that long. So we can see it's almost done. And it says successfully programmed. What I'd like to do is run checksums on the memory buffer, which is the number right here. So 7D, 7C is what the buffer checksum's at. And then we can, right underneath it, we can do the device checksum. Do it a couple times. I usually do that a couple times because if Eproms become intermittent and you keep reading them, even on the programmer, you may get different checksums. if you just kind of do the checksum a couple of times and it comes back clean, then you can be pretty sure that you not just have a good burn, but you have a good Eprom too. And that's it. We take out the Eprom and put it into our dev card. We're back at the bench. One last thing I like to do is use this pin straightener. You just put it in here and you press it together a couple times. And it really doesn't, what it does is it basically tries to get the two rows of pins parallel so they go into sockets easier. And there it is. And what we need to do is turn it on. By the way, I always turn the TV on afterwards because otherwise you can hear. It's just, otherwise I have to turn down the volume and it has loud static sound coming out when there's no input to it. So I'm not doing smoke and mirrors here. I'm just doing it to save you listening to white noise. But we're just going to wait for the tube to warm up a little bit, and looks like it worked. So this is what I'm talking about. It's not that loud, but it gets kind of annoying listening to this, but it does work. Boom. So that's all it took. So let's see this game. Does it start if I hit the trigger button? Yes, it does. Well, they're pretty stupid. They're running into the electrified walls. What? Ooh. Come on up. He ran into the wall too. Yeah, this is kind of a simplified version. I've played this on the Atari 800. And the killer robots are a little bit more aggressive in those games than this. Whoa, whoa, whoa. So yeah, this is not very challenging, but I think you saw how easy it was once you have your image files. So that worked out well. The only question remaining is, I mentioned that you can also do 2K ROMs, and the way you do 2K ROMs is basically, I mean, you can just burn one copy into the upper side of the 2732. I don't, you could put 2716s in here, but then I'd have to have a bunch of jumpers here to configure it, because it does have some other pins that need different inputs. So the idea is, even if you have a 2K ROM, the easiest thing to do is to basically take two 2K images, concatenate them, and then just burn them in here. It'll only use a second copy of it in here. So, I mean, to do it correct, you would need a 2K file filled with FFs and concatenate that to with the actual file, but the easiest way to do it is just to double up the image, make a 4K image out of two 2K identical images, and then this will work too for you. But what about larger images? I mean, the 2600 only allocates 4K to ROM. It does partial decoding that ghosts things all over the place, and the processor only has 16, 15, 14, 13 address lines. So it can actually, the entire address space the processor can access is 8K. So there's some, you have to play games with something called bank switching, where you're switching different sections. An Eprom that's bigger than 4K, you're switching different sections of it in and out of the address space. And I looked at that for a while. I opened some cartridges, and you would expect there to be not only a mask ROM in there, but extra support chips that are used to generate upper address bits that will affect bank switching. But the ones I opened didn't have any extra chips in them, and I did some more research, read a bunch of stuff about it, and it turns out that for anything that was bigger than 4K, they used special mask ROMs that actually, you know, they look like this, but they actually had bank switching capabilities on the ROM. They were very special ROMs, and there were special address areas inside this machine that if you read them, it did bank switching for you. I know that's very brief and inconclusive what I just talked about, but that would be a subject for a future episode, because you would actually, not you, but I would actually have to figure out how they're bank switching and build the bank switching part out of discretes and make sure that it is addressed the way the original cartridges got addressed. And at that point we'd be able to play games that are larger than 4K in size. But don't hold your breath, it's not going to happen today. I think this is a nice overview over how to be able to play most of the early ROM images. For now, even if I want to play larger ROM images, I'm going to have to use an emulator on a PC. But sooner or later I'll figure out how the bank switching works. And that's really why I have this board, instead of just shoehorning it all into the cartridge and cutting a hole into this side so you could replace ROMs. That would only work for 2K and 4Ks like these. But I figured this gives me an opportunity. I have enough of a prototyping area here to add whatever electronics I need to make it play ROMs that are greater than 4K. So now, what we're finally going to do, there's another game that used to be my favorite. I used to play it on the Atari 800, and it's called Threshold. And I've already burned the 4K ROM for that. It's a shooter, but it's a fun shooter. And actually on the 2600, it's more difficult than on the Atari 800 computers. So, really good AI in here. I mean, the patterns they're flying in, God, I probably won't even be able to clear the first board in here. Also, when you die, it resets to a full complement of enemies. It does not remember how many you shot down, which is the way the Atari computer versions work. And lots of shame here. There's also a temperature gauge down there. So I think what happens, yeah, if you just continuously keep the button pressed and auto shoot, eventually you'll overheat your gun and it'll stop working. This is really embarrassing. Oh, come on. But it's not much. On the computer versions, the enemies look different from level to level. They're pretty similar here from level to level. But it actually plays well for a 2600 game. It really does. And one more try to see if I can at least clear the first board, which I'm seemingly not able to do. All right, this is frustrating. Oh, So if you hit the trigger repeatedly, your missile in flight disappears and it starts a new missile. So you got to be careful about your strategy. Oh, I did it. So this game just goes on, and you will have the same kinds of enemies flying different patterns and, well, kicking my behind at least, but okay, I couldn't help myself. I burned a copy of Video Chess, and well, the user interface is interesting, but let's see. So start with white, pawn to king 2. Won't let me do that. I guess black starts. And oh, it's thinking. So it actually made my move and moved its pawn. So let's just do the normal stuff here. Then you gotta wait. And it's thinking. And that, well, so this is the fastest level. I think I mentioned before that if you want to give it more intelligence, you have to, yeah, you go up. You know, here's a selected game, and I think as you go up, the difficulty increases. It's still a miracle how they do this. I mean, if they're using alpha-beta pruning or whatever with 128 bytes of memory, that is just, that's absolutely amazing. And one of the reasons I think it does the little color flashy thing is so it has more CPU time. You don't have to remember the CPU is drawing the screen in real time, and that way with the colors flashing, I guess it makes sure that the CPU can give its full attention to figuring out what to do next. Yeah, this would probably be a really good game to disassemble and have a look at and see how they do this, but okay, so now it's thinking again, and it is taking a little bit longer, but there you have it. Yes, we could go on for hours and hours, but no. It will be interesting. Maybe I'll do this on my own time once and on a high level, and then show a time lapse of it and see, you know, how capable this is. I think Sargon plays better. Final words. When you start burning Eproms, make sure you label them, because before you know it, you'll end up with a handful of Eproms. And sure, you can, you know, stick all of them into the socket and so to know what they are, but label them. It'll make it a lot easier after a while to find the game you want to play. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, share, and comment, and let me know what you think of this, and again, your own experiences with the 2600. Don't hold your breath about me doing, in the near future, doing a video on ROM images greater than 4K. I'm not hugely interested in doing that right now. I have some other things I want to show you first, but yeah, let me know what you would prefer to see, and if you're going to build your own dev card, send me a picture of what yours looks like. See you later.